Okay, we are live. We are live. We are live. We are live. Excellent. Right. What can we look at tonight? We've obviously had some really big, interesting stories going on at the moment in sport. Some really interesting things have happened. Um, you know, the Scottish Premiership is really intense right now. The snooker, there's been a lot happening in the snooker. Some good, a lot bad, and also, there's the English Premier League. Man City losing is probably a good thing. Keeps the title race alive. Makes things really interesting. But there's some more interesting stuff, and you've got to look at the wider picture of sport at the moment. We've had the TV, the gambling firms agree to a TV ads ban or a reduction of TV advertising around sporting fixtures. And that's saying that public pressure and political pressure is actually having an effect on the gambling industry and sport. Um, the shit. So that's a really interesting talking point. Is that the TV companies agreeing to this ads ban? Um, there's more discussions to happen. Obviously, shirt sponsors, stadium sponsors, secondary sponsors for clubs, sponsors for tournaments. There are a lot of contracts signed there, so there's a lot of money invested, a lot of prize money available. Watching the snooker, a little bit of the snooker between Mark Allen and Ronnie O'Sullivan. Tournament sponsored by Betway. Some of the players have got their own personal gambling sponsors as well. So there's still an issue going forward with the gambling industry in sport. But some sports like horse racing are heavily reliant on sports gambling. But what does it mean? Well, they've agreed to several things. Oh, shit. They've agreed to banning ads before, during, and just after a live broadcast. That's what is in place right now. Is that? Hello, Taylor. How you doing? So yeah, the gambling companies have agreed to ban ads before, during, and after a live sports broadcast, and their proposals. There are other issues to do with gambling ads. Another thing that's happened. So if we can discuss gambling TV advertising going forward. Who much did Bees get for MK and for Bison? That is poor. I cannot read that question. I'm sorry. I don't know how much money was raised for the MK Thunder. I believe we donated earlier in the week to the MK Thunder in reducing their budget deficit. I believe a lot of clubs dipped in, but I didn't see any. I honestly don't know how much. I know that at the beginning of the week it was 17,000 budgetary shortfall they had, and when it was announced on Thursday that they needed £10,000, they launched a crowdfunding appeal. Very similar to Invicta in the sense that last year they could compete because the Cardiff Fire were also in the league, and the league went to term without any team dropping out, went to playoffs. Obviously, this season with the Cardiff Fire not icing a team at this level, and not how do I put it? Not that's one less fixture for the fixture list for each team. One less team to play against. There is a reason why they have a 10 grand shortfall. There are other reasons as well. All the teams that have financial issues, and I'm going to put financial here. Their rink or rinks, Planet. Oh yes, these guys. Planet Ice operate every single team that's had money issues this season. Their rinks are operated by Planet Ice. it was the same with Invicta. Planet Ice operated rink. Milton Keynes, Planet Ice operated rink. Basingstoke, their rink issues are slightly different, but there are concerns there with Planet Ice as being a fit operator for ice rinks in this country. They are the biggest ice rink leisure centre operators in this country. They do make a huge amount of money, and there are concerns in the Elite League with Planet Ice as well. I believe Peterborough is Planet Ice as well. I believe Peterborough is the Planet Ice. Here's the thing, Planet Ice. Oh God, they're part of a wider group, but they operate the most rinks. Okay, they operate ice rinks, and they cover that covers the EIHL and they have a lot of rinks in these leagues. They have a lot of rinks in these leagues, a hell of a lot of rinks. They are the biggest ice rink operator in the country, which is why I'm kind of glad Bracknell isn't operated by Planet Ice. I'm glad Slough is not operated by Planet Ice. And Swindon, the Link Centre is different. It's got council involvement. Streatham, council involvement. The Raiders, I believe, have private investment from outside. Down in Romford, Lee Valley, they're not operated by Planet Ice. I think they're operated by their local council. So there's a lot of rinks that aren't operated by Planet Ice. Hell of a lot. And the further north you go, the less operations they have. But no, they do operate a lot of ice rinks in the UK. They're not very popular as an ice rink operator with a lot of people. Their ice rental is expensive. And they've raised the ice rental for ice skating coaches over recent years. That's been regularly criticised by the figure skating community who use that for their training, especially those in the British Olympic programme. They have regularly criticised Planet Ice for their raising of ice rental times. When you rent the ice for a coaching session, they're trying to force you to use Planet Ice registered coaches rather than your own private coach that you've paid for. Plus, they've raised the fees for private coaches to coach during their slots. Also, they've raised this for the ice hockey teams as well that play, which has led to a lot of problems. But the big issue is obviously how the Basingstoke rink's been handled over the last 2-3 seasons and 2, 3, 4, 5 years. There have been long-standing issues with that rink structurally long before. There's a lot going on with Planet Ice going forward. They have a big say in how a lot of teams are run, and if things like the Elite League is to be sustainable and British ice hockey to improve across all levels, and keep producing players that can get drafted by the North American NHL, AHL, ECHL, or even the OHL, just increasing the level of quality of players. The sport over the whole country, Planet Ice is a big part of playing that, and they're harming British ice hockey more than helping at a time when we have economic uncertainty going forward, which I know will bore you young lads intensely, because politics isn't really a thing that interests a lot of young people, hasn't until recently. But economically, with this Brexit thing and what we don't know what the future is going to hold for this country, Planet Ice could be far more responsible as a rink owner. And all they've done is they put profits before anything else. And if British ice hockey continue to develop, they need to be more supporting of the British ice hockey scene. They need to support these teams more and give them a fair crack at actually making some money as well. But the Milton Keynes one is very, very similar to Invicta. Invicta was nowhere near as bad, but there is an issue that the system isn't working effectively for all teams. It isn't fair for all teams. You notice the former EPIHL teams have bigger budgets, more stability, better coaching, better players. They generally have more fans to fill out an arena because they're normally the biggest team in their town. They don't have an elite league team in the area. The Elite League has taken Guildford and Milton Keynes Lightning out of the second tier. That's had a knock-on effect because you've lost rivalry games. You've lost a rivalry game that Basingstoke would have with Guildford, or Bracknell would have with Guildford. You've lost that rivalry that Peterborough would have with Milton Keynes. You've suddenly lost an intense rivalry there, which is a problem. and that's a problem, a long-term problem. The Elite League could form, how do I put it, affiliations. If Scotland did become independent, that could have an unfortunate impact on the. It would probably be more unfortunate for Scottish ice hockey than Great British ice hockey overall. I think obviously there's more teams in England, and Wales is starting to have a few more teams crop up. I think the fact that the SNP want to still have central government funding from Westminster after they go independent is a joke. They, want to take Scotland out of a union of four nations that has worked reasonably effectively for nearly 300 years. Um, the reason why Scotland's part of the UK is that Scotland was actually bankrupt. So there's lots of machinations behind that. And it's all political and historical. And that's generally for the other channel. But yeah, no, Scottish ice hockey would go down the toilet very, very quickly. The standard of play would go down the toilet very, very quickly. And those Scottish players that want to continue to play at international level will probably choose Britain over Scotland because they have more chance of um, getting drafted by the NHL if they were to be good enough, or go into a better league. B, the Scottish teams are less financially well off anyway. They really are. The powerhouses of British ice hockey are Sheffield, Nottingham, and Cardiff and Belfast, which aren't Scottish teams. So I think, yeah, the knock-on effects for Scottish sport would be huge. The Scottish sport does get a lot of centralised funding, at grassroots level at least, from the Westminster government, and that gets distributed via devolution to the Scottish Parliament at Holyrood into their budget. UK athletics and UK sport and the British Olympic Association does give a lot of funding directly to other governing bodies of sport. So it's not just ice hockey; it's football. It's even cricket gets a little bit of government funding at schools and colleges and universities. Um, Rugby union, rugby league, you name it, any sport that's professional or semi-professional in Scotland or even amateur does still at some point get some kind of government funding through education or grant. Um, and the British Olympic Association and UK Sport is a centralised body that then dishes out things for the curling programme. And yeah, Scottish curling I think would be fine, in the sense that it has a player base, but it is heavily reliant on UK athletics and UK sport basically funding Scottish curling, because there's very few teams in the north of England in the borders to sustain. Um, no, we beat the Raiders 5-1. We beat the Raiders 5-1 last night. I've just done a video on it. It should be up on the channel. So if you want to check that out, I basically explain how boring the game was. It wasn't a great game. Morris in the Raiders net kept. I know Morris in the Invicta net, sorry, kept the scoreline really, really respectable. We're playing the Raiders tonight. We're facing off in about an hour's time in Romford. And then we have, what do we have? We have, shit. We've got the Raiders tonight, and then next weekend on Sunday we have Invicta, and then Saturday after we have Swindon, and then we have Swindon on the Sunday. So there's a few games before Christmas to roll forward. That's going to be an interesting one into Christmas, and then we'll see what happens in the new year. The big story is obviously will the Milton Keynes Thunder be able to survive to the new year? Also, the Milton Keynes Lightning, they're not doing so well either. Obviously, the Milton Keynes Lightning met the requirements for the Elite League to be taken up to that higher level, and I think the Elite League's overextended themselves with that team. But the Edinburgh Capitals going out of business had an effect as well. There's all sorts of permutations going on with British ice hockey at the moment, and not a lot of them are positive. The fact that teams are having to crowdfund to survive says to me that the system is broken, very broken, and unsustainable as it currently stands. So there is an issue going forward, and sustainability of the sport, professional and at semi-professional and amateur levels across the board, is concerning. I got involved in the icing on the skate live stream podcast on Monday, and I raised the question about finances at both at the Elite League and National League levels, and teams struggling financially. And it does suggest that yes, the system is very broken, and there is issues with the men's team now. Obviously, getting to the top level of the IIHF rankings and getting to the top. Well, you can be playing at the World Championships next spring in Slovakia. You would think there'd be a positive behind that. And Liam Kirk getting drafted and other players, predicted to get drafted by the NHL in the next 5 years, you would think, there'll be some positives. And yes, the sport was growing massively, but there's a clear financial imbalance within funding and within budgets. People are saying, well, why doesn't London have an elite league team? Well, there's a reason for that. You have several teams already in London. They don't like each other. And would the O2 be willing to put in an ice rink whereby that's going to affect the fact that the O2 is a massive music venue, is a massive has basketball, it has multiple events there. Will they bring in enough money to warrant having a 10,000 plus seater arena in the O2 for ice hockey for a whole season? Not just a one-off game where the NHL will come into town for a pre-season, but a whole season before playoffs. Would the O2 be willing to possibly take a financial hit on, because London rents and London prices are a lot higher? Does London have enough of an NHL or an ice hockey fan base to warrant that kind of move? You can't just set up a team and hope fans turn up. You have to do a little bit more than that. In the London area, there are multiple teams. We've got the Raiders, you've got the Chelmsford Chieftains just outside in Essex, you've got the Invicta just in Kent, Streatham actually in central London. They're only in Brixton, which is just south of the river. You've got the Lee Valley Lions. You've got teams on the edge of London, outside, such as Bracknell, Guildford, and Milton Keynes, and then you go down the M4 a little bit, and you've got Swindon, and you can't just put a team in a location and hope people follow it. There has to be a little bit more research done. And is it going to be successful? Are people actually willing to turn up? Can they recruit the players? Because property prices and living costs in London are so much higher than the rest of the country. There's a lot more to it than just put a team there and get some players in. There's a lot of considerations to look at. There's a lot of other non-sporting issues to look at as well. Is the demographic there? Is there a fan base there to warrant putting this much money into a London team? There's been talk of a KHL franchise playing in London at some point. Again, that's going to be interesting. And all this talk has come since the NFL have been playing games regularly in London at Wembley and Twickenham. There's talk of having an NFL franchise in London. It's going to be really, really interesting. But yeah, there is a lot to talk about there in that respect. There is a lot to talk about. Is ice hockey sustainable right now in the system we have, with the structures we have, league structure? Should there be a return of a separate second tier like the old EPIHL used to be, or the old British National League was before that? Because that system did sort of work to a point. There were flaws with it, but it did work at times. But teams did have money problems, but there was some kind of positivity to that, where it was a stepping stone of development from national to Premier to elite. That there was a stepping stone process. But there's a lot of discussions about sport in London, and it's not just ice hockey. It's a variety of issues. The teams that have had the money problems are based near the London area, so again, sort of says a lot about the Greater London area. Financially, the rates they would have to pay for ice rental, living costs are higher in London. There's a lot of issues around ice hockey in London, and the southeast. Most of the teams that have money problems are from the southeast or London. What else is there? Oh yeah, in France. This is a slightly different topic because of the riots in France. French league games have been massively affected in all professional leagues in France in football. It started with the PSG match against Montpellier being called off earlier in the week, and it's now spread to teams all over the country have called off their home games, citing security concerns to do with with policing and not just policing, but just general security concerns, because they cannot guarantee that they'll be able to police at their games, and the riots are getting violent in France. So that's had a massive impact on the French league. I was going to do a video on that, but then it's snowballed from just the PSG game to games all over the French leagues, and football being called off. I wouldn't be surprised if rugby's affected as well at some point, because they just can't guarantee the security. The protests are getting seriously violent in France, and it's been going on now for nearly a month, and there's no signs this is gonna stop. This is nearly a month worth of protests, and there is no sign that these protests are going to wind down at any point. They're getting pretty violent. People have actually been killed in France with these protests, and it is very interesting to see that the French league allowed league games to continue for 2-3 weeks before they went, yeah, we're going to start calling off games because we can't guarantee the safety of the players and fans. What else is there to talk about? The title race in both Scotland and England in the Premier Leagues in football is really interesting. Kilmarnock are actually now a cat amongst the pigeons in Scotland, and Liverpool winning and Man City losing has really shaken up the English Premier League, with Chelsea getting that cheeky 2-0 win against Man City. We could also debate how long Mourinho has got left at United. A 4-1 win over Fulham isn't gonna, it's just papers over the cracks. Fulham are not a good side on the scheme of things. They are the worst side in the league. They've already sacked a manager and replaced him. I don't know how long Mourinho's got left. It's one win in a month. I don't know how long Mourinho has actually got left there, and the transfer window is going to be crucial. If Man United have a poor transfer window, they're in trouble. They are in trouble if they do not sign a big name player or get some players in that can benefit the team in a positive fashion. They are in serious trouble. If you look at the top 8, they are 16 points behind first, and last year they finished 19 points behind first, and they were second last year. So there are concerns with Scotland with Man United going forward. Obviously their fans have got used to a lot of success, primarily under the Ferguson era, but Van Gaal kept them competitive as well to a point. They weren't beautiful to watch, but he kept them in there. He got the odd bit of silverware. Mourinho's had one trophy, but they haven't looked close to winning the league for a long time. And I don't think going forward they look close to winning. I think they got worse. I think that Europa League benefited the team, gave them a little shot in the arm for a brief period, but it sort of was a really, even though they finished second, a really poor season last year. They lost the worst FA Cup final in living memory to Chelsea. They looked really flat last season. They're looking very flat this season. Players seem to be very unhappy at Man United. I think Mourinho is slowly losing that dressing room. I think there are concerns there when your best players aren't producing regularly, especially when you've got World Cup winners in your squad, and they're not really playing with a freedom or a happiness that you would expect. I think it's a very toxic atmosphere at Man United, and it has been for quite some time. Also on the footballing front, obviously Newcastle United, Mike Ashley is back into talks to sell his team. He's now talking to, I think, the Rockefeller Capital Management Group, alongside Peter Kenyon, he's been brought in into this consortium of potential buyers. That's going to be really interesting to look at. Does Mike Ashley finally sell Newcastle. He got very close last year. We don't know how close he got with Amanda Staveley, but there were rumoured to be other table offers. This is probably one of them. It's probably been a slow burner in the background. He wants this deal done by Christmas. If a deal is to take place, he's got 14 days from the agreement to be fulfilled. There's Premier League rules in place. There's Football League rules in place. If the deal is as serious as Mike Ashley claims it is, let's get that camera at the right angle. If Mike Ashley is as serious as he claims he is, we could see about 5-6 days before Christmas Newcastle being sold, which will be the perfect timing for the transfer window, which would be the perfect time for Benitez to get the assurances he needs going forward, because he has said, "You back me or I walk." They have had a lot of controversy in the recent seasons of Newcastle. They've had this tax investigation. They've had police raids. They've had one collapse takeover bid 12 months ago. It's not been a happy place at Newcastle in recent years. The fans want a resolution to what is happening behind the scenes at Newcastle. Rafa Benitez has said, whoever is owning the club by January the 1st needs to back me in the transfer window. So that's really, really interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. It's going to be interesting to see, how long things sort of carry on like this. But with what happened with Amanda Staveley and what sort of fizzled out in the end, I followed it from the beginning to end, and I believe, from what I hear, the offer was anywhere between 300 and 350 million pounds tabled bid by Amanda Staveley in the end. And it just didn't come to fruition for whatever reason that may be. And she has been involved in football takeovers herself before, so it was not as if she was alien to the process. She was involved with the Man City successful takeover, and she was involved with an unsuccessful takeover bid for Liverpool around the same time. So it wasn't the first time she's been interested in investing in British sport and ownership. But it'll be interesting to see what the outcome happens with Newcastle. It's just a long running saga. Will he, won't he sell the club? The value of the club has declined rapidly since he bought it. Their standing in the league has declined rapidly since he bought it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I've done a video on the timeline of Mike Ashley's ownership. I've looked in the ins and outs of how many times he's put the club up for sale. This would be the third official time the club's been up for sale in the last 10 years. So we shall see going forward what is likely to happen. I mean, Mike Ashley buys the club. Let's have a look at their timeline. He buys the club in 2007. Within 3 years they are relegated. Relegate. I think that was roughly, about 2010. I think 2010. I think we're at 2010. They promoted straight away, and then they're promoted again. And then not long after, they're relegated again. And let's just get rid of that 2010 because I don't remember quite what year they were relegated the first time. So this is the thing, they're relegated again. Then they're promoted again. And then you have the tax investigation. And then Amanda Staveley comes along with her bid. And now the American bid, I'm going to put that here. So we're here, 2018. So in 11 years, hello. So in 11 years, we've gone with Newcastle. So we're going to put Newcastle here. Since Mike Ashley has owned the club, you know, they've bought them. They've got relegated, promoted, relegated, promoted. There's been a tax investigation, which is still ongoing. That's not going away anytime soon. That's a French investigation. Then Amanda Staveley came in a few months after with her first bid, and now you've had this American bid after the Amanda Staveley bid in 2017 collapsed. That's basically a timeline of Mike Ashley's ownership of Newcastle. It's there's a lot going on. There's a lot always going on. There's an ongoing tax investigation into Newcastle United and Mike Ashley's ownership. It's going to be interesting seeing, you know, what happens with if this bid takes place. If it does take place, Rafa Benitez gets money to spend. If it doesn't, Rafa Benitez could walk away, and the Newcastle are in trouble. What else is happening? The snooker. Ronnie O'Sullivan's comments this week about forming a breakaway snooker tour. There are 128 players on the world circuit. There are those on the regional circuit below that, like qualifiers and club players. The 128 players on the world circuit, 2 have just been banned for match fixing. And John Higgins is, you know, making some comments as well, and Stephen Maguire. So there's a few players who've been under investigation for match fixing. There's those who've been banned. When Ronnie O'Sullivan came out with these comments, Barry Hearn basically said, enough's enough now. If you're not happy with the system, sit down and we'll have discussions about the current tournament system that World Snooker has. Now, Ronnie O'Sullivan is currently winning the UK Championship final against Mark Allen. He's 6-2 up as I'm doing this live stream, although, you know, the evening session is going to start in a couple of hours. So he's winning the final. He's made some really interesting comments, which I don't agree with. You know, he's threatening this breakaway tour, but the players he's named that he wants on it are either linked to match fixing, being under investigation for match fixing, or banned for match fixing. So I don't know what he's trying to get at here, but he's come out with some of these ludicrous claims in the past that he could beat the most of the world tour with his wrong hand, and he could play left-handed or right-handed. He's never actually played a full match with the wrong hand. He's come out and made some massive claims in the past. He is one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest of all time. But his comments aren't helpful with with most players. We're talking about over 120 players saying we have no interest in this plan by Ronnie O'Sullivan. Should he get that frustrated? I think he's just throwing his toys out the pram because he's an ego. He's not doing what's best for Snoop. He's doing what's best for Ronnie O'Sullivan to try and make himself as much money as possible. And he's got very wealthy out of Barry Hearn's ownership and running of snooker since Barry Hearn took over the sport. The sport was on its last legs and has recovered sufficiently over the years to be where it is now. Aberdeen, yes, Aberdeen. I've been looking at the Scottish table when Kilmarnock got to the top of the table the other day before their defeat to Celtic. Aberdeen, have been really underwhelming this season. Very slow start, but it's still a very, very close table. The Scottish table is far closer than people realise with all the points and where teams are at. I mean, Rangers dropping points today with a draw against Dundee, the worst team in the league. That's a shock. I think that's more of a shock. Hearts have stopped the bleeding with a win. The table is a lot more congested from, I think, 7th, from Livingston upwards, really, maybe St Johnstone, maybe Motherwell, but it's more congested than people realise. It's a lot tighter this season than in previous seasons. And, you know, that's good to see. You know, it's good to see that there's more competitiveness now in the league this season, and it's a lot tighter, and there isn't one team running away with the title. That is a real positive to see. And the last time Kilmarnock were top at this stage in the season, they went on to win. And the last time they were top was 20 years ago. So it's good to see another club at the top that hasn't been there for a while. And yes, Hearts did get a very well deserved win the other day, but it is good to see Hearts and Kilmarnock and clubs like that being more competitive in a league for a very long time, which has been dominated by two teams, and in the last decade, one per team in particular. Um, there are still issues with Scottish football. The UEFA coefficient doesn't actually benefit Scottish football, and because Scottish football is where it is, the coefficient doesn't actually help them because of Celtic failing to get to the Champions League and the way the UEFA coefficient is being worked out, and the way this new Europa League 2 competition that's coming up in a couple of years. Scottish football rapidly needs to improve in the next 3 years, otherwise they risk really being European outcasts and not developing as much as they would like. And I think UEFA are making a big mistake with the change in European club football with a third tournament that no one really wants. I can't see how that's actually beneficial to the some of the professional leagues getting to a higher standard. The top professional leagues, I cannot see with the disparity between the big five, big six, and the rest. I don't see how that's going to help the second tier sort of level of the professional top leagues in Europe improve their quality and their depth and the skill level and grow the fan base. I can't see how that's going to help when you put this third tier of European competition in, and then you change the qualification routes for the Europa League as it stands, and possibly the Champions League. I really don't see how that's going to help European football go forward. They're trying to stave off this European Super League, and they're getting desperate. And they've also mentioned UEFA have also mentioned that they are looking at possibly interfering in domestic football more to encourage there to be more European games. I do not see how that is also going to help the situation. Your league's your bread and butter, and and you know, cup competition is a bonus. I also think yes, Celtic winning the Scottish Premiership will not help situation. I don't think Rangers winning would help it either. I think a team like Kilmarnock or Hearts, who are both still in with a shout of the title race themselves, Hearts have obviously had that wobble. Kilmarnock have just been consistent. I think possibly one of the most consistent teams all season. That makes the league far more competitive and a far better league going forward. If Celtic were to win again, then the league just doesn't have that competitive credibility abroad, and will continue to struggle. And the Scottish national team will continue to struggle. It needs a new name at the top of the table. It needs a new name on a trophy. It needs fresh investment because who's going to actually want to watch Motherwell playing St Johnstone outside of Motherwell and St Johnstone fans that probably number about less than 100,000 worldwide? That's not going to sell at the moment because there's no underdog story. There's no any team can win in the top flight. It's basically down to one team and who comes second. And Aberdeen basically being so lackluster this season, I don't think helps. I think that makes the situation worse, and that's down to transfer window management and management of the players that are there. So there's a lot of issues for Scottish football to look at and to consider. I think Rangers have overachieved this season under Gerrard, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think Gerrard's had a positive effect in his first season in management, much like Frank Lampard at Derby County. They've had very positive starts to their managerial careers going forward, and that is a positive sign for the future of football management in this country. But no, there's a lot of things to discuss. There's a lot of things to look at. There's a lot of things to worry about with Scottish football. There's some positives, but a lot of negatives as well. They do need to seriously look at the strength and depth of the leagues. And there you go. It shows how random the Scottish season has been and how inconsistent sides have been. Dropping points, picking up wins, dropping points. Hearts have had their wobble and they've now had a bounce back win, but they lost I think 4 or 5 in a row. They had a really shocking run, and they've gone from top to fourth. So Hearts will be looking to get back into the hunt. The transfer window is going to be interesting in Scotland. The transfer rules on the window in Scotland are slightly different to England, but that's going to be really interesting to see what players get picked up, what players get sold. That's going to be interesting to see that. But no, overall, there is an issue with the quality depth in Scottish football, the development of young players, the development of coaches, financing. There's a lot of issues across the board within the sport in Scotland, and they're not going to be fixed overnight. It's going to take a long time to fix them. I think it's the same with most Scottish sport. There's just less money in Scotland than there was in the past. There's a lot less money in Scotland now in real terms than there used to be. And on a more national level, in talking about the UK as a whole, sports funding is regularly been in the spotlight for Olympics and World Championships, and on yearly funding cycles. And some sports have been hammered when it comes. I did a video on where Kilmarnock were when they were leading. Celtic obviously leapfrogged them. Rangers have dropped points. So Kilmarnock, I think, are now third. Rangers are second. Celtic are first. It comes down to goal difference. Rangers got a better goal difference over Kilmarnock, although Kilmarnock have a decent goal difference. Hearts' goal difference is really, really poor. So if they were to get back into that kind of mix on goal difference, their goal difference is worse than Kilmarnock and Rangers and Celtics. That's what the top four looks like. But there are problems to consider because Aberdeen losing to St Johnstone screws up a few things where I was thinking about where, because they were on the up. They had leapfrogged Livingston, who have had a good season themselves considering their budget and the size of their club. So there are. It's a lot tighter than people realise. There's not a lot of points in it. It is very close to the top, but it's the size of the league. When you got a league that's 12 teams, I believe, big. You're not going to have that much of a gap between first and last. But on saying that, St Mirren and Dundee are looking a little bit lonely at the bottom, and whether they can catch up to Motherwell and Hamilton and make it a bit more competitive at top and bottom, we shall see. But I'm surprised Aberdeen are as low as they are. I'm not surprised with Kilmarnock making these strides this season. I'm really not surprised with Killie making the strides they've had. I'm not surprised with Hearts making the strides they've had up till recently. But I don't really follow Scottish football in depth, but it's just really surprising that I have so many Scottish subscribers who subscribe to the channel and regularly get involved in live streams and leaving comments and likes and shares and getting involved. It does surprise me that I've got a fair few out of my UK subscriber base, which is most of the subscribers on the channel, let's be honest, make up the majority of my subscribers are UK based. The majority of a large proportion live in Scotland. It would be nice to see on the data where subscribers actually come from regionally, but I just give it as Great Britain, which is really annoying. And it would be nice to see what countries people come from and what regions in what countries. But it's the way the analytics work. It's stupid. But no, it's surprising how many Scottish subscribers I actually have. It's great fun discussing things with the Scottish subscribers. I'm kind of glad of the Scottish subscriber base because you guys are a good laugh. I will say that. Oh yeah, I do think Hamilton are flirting with it, but yes, St Mirren and Dundee look like they are really struggling. But it'll be interesting to see who from the Scottish Championship takes those two promotion places. It really will be really interesting to see who actually gets promoted. But the promotion relegation system in Scotland is weird with the playoff structure they have. I don't like the Scottish playoff structure at all. I'm not a big fan of it. Because if you are second bottom and in the relegation zone, you can still survive to fight another day. I think, yeah, the promotion relegation system in Scotland is flawed and is complicated when it doesn't need to be. Um, a simple promotion relegation system would vastly help Scottish football. Um, would help it no end. Uh, it'd be really beneficial to simplify the system. But the SFA and the SPFL have shown already this season and in previous seasons how bonkers and poorly run those organisations are. The plans for the double header at Hampden sum up the poor structures that Scottish football has. Yes, Dundee United are looking good, but looking good in a league below. And when you get promoted, and would they be able to compete in the league above? That's two separate things. I mean, we're looking at the promoted sides in the English Premier League. Cardiff are average, and I say average with love. Fulham are shocking, and Wolves. Even this time last year, I said they had enough. If they were going to go up, they'll be a mid-table side, and they are. So, if we're debating, a team looking good in one particular league, that's fine. But are they actually financially and squad depth prepared for the league above? Because running costs are higher, wages are higher, ticket prices are going to have to be higher. With the fans willing to buy in, is the budget there to recruit the players and pay them? Can they financially compete? There's a whole host of things to look at when a team is doing well in a promotion relegation style league. And there have been calls from some for a salary cap and a transfer spending cap in European football. The thing is, we already have a system in place called financial fair play, and it's no surprise to me that it's failing. I do believe I do have a subscriber from who is a Sir Johnston fan somewhere in the depths of the channel, floating around. Um, there's a lot of Scottish subscribers on the channel. If we're being serious, there are a hell of a lot of Scottish subscribers to the channel. And it does surprise me because I don't do that much on Scottish sport, if I'm honest. I don't cover that many Scottish players, teams, um, and leagues. I've done a few on the Scottish Premier League because I know the subscriber base, um, you know, is there. But I'm just surprised by the amount. I do believe I do have some Johnston fan who's a subscriber, so I'll have to look into my public subscription list, those who make their subscriptions public, like you, some of you guys have, but you don't have to. And that's something else that's a bit annoying, but it is what it is. Yeah, I think it's St Johnston are the best. Also, I've got a Kilmarnock fan as well who's a subscriber. I think a Hamilton fan as well. It's the Rangers FC fanboy. All his mates, he got them to subscribe back in April, and a lot of them support a variety of clubs. And it's really interesting that there isn't this, the sectarian vile banter. There's the banter of like Celtic, Rangers, or Aberdeen, Motherwell. And it's acceptable, but sectarianism in Scottish football is a concern. And it's still there. Manchester Storm, Nottingham Panthers game last night, refereeing in the league needs to improve. I would say refereeing across British ice hockey, but across sport needs to improve markedly. But ice hockey is a big concern. We saw last season the Belfast Sheffield Galacos incident where a player was head check someone from behind after taking a real. Was it a day? I don't know. I would say British ice hockey refereeing does need improvement, does need help, and that's for all levels of the game. Although last night, if you look at my Bracknell Bees and Victor Dynamo's match report, I don't slag off the referee. No need to. Thompson, the referee last night, had a very, very good game. His linos were very, very good. But no, I've watched a few games of the Elite League on Free Sports. I've caught the odd bit or piece of the odd game, and there have been a few odd calls. I will admit, but I would say the refereeing standard is better than what it was. There are still massive improvements that British ice hockey needs to make. But I could also say this about the NHL. There's some poor NHL officiating this season. I would be willing, yes, I would be willing to come to an Aberdeen game. It's all down to money side of things at the moment, but I'd be more than happy to go to the other end of the UK and watch a game. Absolutely, I've been invited to the US to watch Indiana Pace Indiana Pacers game in the NBA. Um, Not that I'm a fan of the NBA as such, but it would be nice to see that kind of North American experience over a European sporting experience. I know they're completely different with match night experience or match day experience between here in the UK and Europe and in North America. So I've been invited to some Canadian ice hockey games and NBA games and all sorts. So I'll be more than happy um, should the money side of things and the channel growth side of things be there. I'm more than happy to hop on a train or a plane and watch an Aberdeen game. It would be kind of cool. But football is something that I'm slowly. I know we've discussed football a lot this evening, but football is a sport that I'm slowly falling out of love with for a variety of reasons. And ticket price is one of them. I don't know how much you would pay for an Aberdeen ticket. I really don't. But looking at the English Premier League, some of the prices that some of the clubs are charging, that's unsustainable for the domestic fan base. It's all well and good selling all these TV deals and merchandise deals abroad, but if your domestic fan base can't afford to go to a game, it doesn't work. Yes, the IBO have obviously ordered a mandatory rematch because it was a draw. That's not the only boxing governing body to basically say a rematch is on the card. So Fury Wilder will happen. There'll be a Fury Wilder 2. I would say it was a very even contest in the first time round. It will be very even in the second time round. But these are two very big men who are both unbeaten and remain unbeaten. If they draw again, they might go, sod it. Fury might go, I'm retiring unbeaten, which he is. And Wilder might go, okay, I'm retiring unbeaten, which he is. They don't have to face Anthony Joshua. But yeah, no, the IBO. This is the problem with boxing, though. They have so many different belts and different governing bodies. You've got WBO, IBO. It would have. See you later, Mr. Aberdeen. Have an enjoyable evening. Enjoy yourself. Hopefully, the weather is decent in northeast Scotland because it's bloody shit down here in southeast England. It's not nice. The weather's terrible. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and if I don't see you on a live stream before Christmas, enjoy your Christmas and your New Year's. But boxing itself does need a singular governing body, because we have, I think, 5 different governing bodies for international boxing. Plus, then you've got all the domestic, boxing governing bodies as well. So you've got the French Commission, the British Board of Boxing Classification. You have all the European nations have their own boxing boards, where they issue out licenses, and then you've got the various state athletic commissions in the US, and then you have the Canadian, and then Australian, and New Zealand, and Commonwealth, and there needs to be a singular boxing governing body to oversee, much like FIFA in football or World Rugby in rugby union. There needs to be a singular governing body because it's getting stupid now. When it comes to boxing, how many governing bodies do you need at the top level? And boxing itself is a sport much like MMA with the UFC promotion, amongst others, that has problems. There is a IBO, WBC, WBO, IBC, and I knew there was the WBO and IBF and IBO. I didn't know about the IBC and WBC, but it makes a mockery of what is a world champion and who is the world's best. You need to have an overall governing body for the sport, because to have 5 world international governing bodies, makes the sport a little bit comical. Because you can be banned by the IBO for an infringement. You could be banned, let's say, by the WBO, but be able to box in the IBF under that promotion and governing body. So it does make a mockery of discipline. It makes a mockery of the fact that to unify all 5 belts in each weight division, something needs to change in boxing governance, because it is a complicated system. You can be banned by one governing body of boxing, but not another. So you could be a WBC under a ban for whatever, a drugs infringement. Ayrton Senna, how many more titles would Ayrton Senna have? That's hindsight. Um, that is hindsight, but he was struggling in that season. I don't think he would have had he lived for the rest of the '94 season, he would have been anywhere close to Schumacher uh, and um, and others. I just don't see it. I Whether he was had already peaked and his powers were waning is another thing as well. There were some other good drivers still on the grid. Damon Hill was still there. Um, you had Mika Hakkinen, who would then be a double world champion himself. There were still a lot of good drivers on that grid at the time of his passing, and some were young and exciting, and others were like Prost, had not long retired, who was still involved in the sport. And you had Damon Hill, a future champion, on that grid as well. So there were still other drivers there that were sniffing around, um, you know, and I don't know if he hadn't have died, what the outcome would have been. I don't think Schumacher necessarily would have been as dominant. You wouldn't have won 7 titles, um, but at the same time, at the same time, hindsight's an interesting thing. But the regulations have changed because there was, I think, Mika Hakkinen had a pretty horrific accident as well that season, which took him a long time to recover from. Which delayed his sort of development as world champion. It took him longer to get to world championship kind of status, and when he was double world championship in '99 and 2000. And there were regulation changes because McLaren had a weird pointed nose, which Williams sort of copied, and that partly led to Senna's death. Was the structures um, of the cars. Michael Schumacher, yes, Michael Schumacher obviously was going into that race at Imola with a very good record. Senna was struggling. The car he had though with Williams was not a great car. It was undrivable. Damon Hill, future world champion, said that car was terrifying to drive, and he's one of the best drivers that Britain's ever produced. Um, so there were flaws with the Williams that year. The Benetton was a far better all-round car, even though Barrichello decided to take off and land on top of a barrier and almost snap himself in half. But all the cars had problems. Ratzenberger died the day before, very similar accident. The safety of the cars was shocking. The aero packages you weren't great. And if we are to look in hindsight, was Senna past his best? Possibly, he might have already peaked. Schumacher, Schumacher only really had Damon Hill and Mika Hakkinen, I would say, really challenging him, and Jacques Villeneuve. Villeneuve wasn't in the sport at the time, but came to the sport anyway. He did some testing in 1996 before the season started, and in '95 in the off season. And he got a phone call from Williams, to do some testing, and he did. And at the end of the day, Villeneuve backed up Damon Hill when in '96 he came along in '97 and won the title as well. But Damon Hill left Williams to go to Jordan, and Villeneuve became the main man, and that was a great battle in '96 and '97 between those two, and '98 Schumacher gets back on the top step, and then Hakkinen won too. So it was the '90s wasn't Schumacher's decade; it was the 2000s that was Schumacher's decade. Schumacher only won 3 titles in the '90s. Williams won, I think, more titles than Schumacher did, ironically. And McLaren got 2 titles in that decade. So the whole decade wasn't Schumacher's dominance. That was when I think F1 was at its most competitive for titles. Since 2000, yes, it was a very uncompetitive in the sense that Schumacher won all the time with 5 back to back. But I've gone off F1 in recent years. I think the peak of my interest was when Jenson Button won his F1 title back in 2009. And over the last decade, it has slowly waned to the point where we're getting to the point now where there's, after 2019, there's only going to be 1 live race a year. That is if the British Grand Prix still takes place. We don't know what's going to happen with Silverstone post 2019. We have no confirmation if there's going to be a British Grand Prix. We have no confirmation if there's going to be an Italian Grand Prix in the future or a France Grand Prix. So when Liberty Media came along and bought the sports rights, they said, well, we are going to expand into new horizons. We're going to keep the traditional European circuits. And they're failing to do so because Bernie Ecclestone, who has done his utmost to make the sport as uncompetitive as possible and is just all for the money, it's led to this point where, oh God, this cold is killing me off. We've led to this point where, the big teams have got too big. Ferrari gets special dispensation going forward, which I think is wrong. I do think Ferrari getting special dispensation is wrong, for a variety of reasons. There's all sorts of issues within the sports governance and the direction the sport is going to take. And we could do some notes on the board and really get into in depth about F1. But I've made my views on F1 over the last year and a half very clear on this channel. I'm switching off it. The Monaco Grand Prix this year was well, painful, and I sat through that, and I actually would rather have done other things, but the weather wasn't great. And I sat through that, and I wonder why I sat through that to this day. That was the worst Grand Prix I've ever seen. I think, yeah, F1 has problems, and the big teams are not willing to share the toys with the little teams to make it a more fun experience, which ultimately would get more viewers and more fans, and they would actually make more money. But they want to keep winning, and the Red Bull are throwing their toys out the pram that if they don't keep winning, they'll withdraw from the sport, which is just stupid. Hello, Mr. Avery. Hello, Sean. How you doing? It's been a while. Some of the things you put on your Twitter feed are hilarious. I'm not gonna lie. They are absolutely hilarious. Some of the things that come up on your Twitter feed, which to a non-hockey fan would make absolutely no sense, but I find absolutely hilarious. Canadians on Twitter is a dangerous thing. It's funny, but exceptionally dangerous. No, well, the NHL, that's something we could discuss, is the chance of an NHL lockout in 2020. I think it's about 50-50, with the fact that Seattle wanted to get into the NHL before 2020 or on the 2020 season, and they were told no. The concerns about Key Arena are there. They're going to come in 2021. I think it would have made more sense if Houston were the expansion team. Automatically, the divisions are balanced without having to move Arizona, but at the same time, Arizona moving to the Central is not as bad as it could be. Super League to the NRL. Well, the issue is with that is we've just seen Ryan Hall and Bateman go over to the NRL this off season. Wayne Bennett still an NRL coach coaching England. I still see the NRL as the better of the two, because over here we play the Super League, the Challenge Cup, and the Super League playoffs as well. We actually play more games, so we don't have state of origin. The quality of skill level, physicality, the standard of the pitches is higher. They have a reason. Well, I wouldn't say. I would say that the skill level is higher. It's played nationwide in rugby league. I think I saw, Sean. I think I saw some of your tweets. I will be looking at your Twitter feed later on because it is. I find it refreshing that you're so brutally honest and you don't care if you're going to Twitter jail. I think there are some idiots who have used the social media platform over the last 18 months and have made it more difficult for people like us who are of more reasonable mind and willing to debate the pros and cons. Now, I'm not going to agree with every one of my viewers. Some of my viewers have disagreed with me on various topics, saying I think this is what's going to happen. Blah, 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 blah. I'm more than happy to have a disagreement over point of view on a sport. Absolutely, you can absolutely disagree with me about a variety of things. You could say, for example, let's have a look at this. Let me get some pens. Let's get some pens. Pens are good. Pens are good. I like that. So, oh shit, like NHL expansion, for example. this is a hot topic for a lot of fans. Okay, NHL expansion. Whoa. Oh dear. Okay, that's more than just being a douche streamer. That's just being a vile human being, and there's evidence of domestic violence. Now, whether she's willing to press charge, and the fact she's pregnant as well was pretty disgusting. I'm not going to lie. The fact she's pregnant and he does that, scumbag, absolute scumbag. But sure, if I'm going to go back, I will see your tweets later. I can leave a message on your Twitter or send you a DM about that, and we can discuss that about another time. But I'm going to look at this. We'll look at NHL expansion. That's something that you know a lot about, and I know a lot about. Both being hockey fans, and I'm both supporting Canadian franchises. Yes, NHL expansion is a big, hot topic because the NHL has gone under Gary Bettman, and he is a guy that no one particularly likes, to non. Oh, I've misspelled traditional because I'm a absolute mongoloid. Yeah, I said a naughty word. Oh, go to Twitter prison. That's better. Non-traditional markets. The NHL have been criticised for going to non-traditional markets, and this is why I responded to Sean's question there. Kane, Mr. Snow, I will get to your question in a minute. But if we look at the NHL expansion, most of the teams are in non-traditional markets, and we're going to put Vegas in there. We're going to put Vegas. Okay, and this is divided opinion of a sport. NHL expansion has been good for the league. Now, you asked a question about the Super League, Kane, and I'm going to get onto the Super League versus NRL. I am. Let's have a look at Super League versus NRL. Okay, we've looked at this basically since the channel started. We have looked at the Super League on this side and the NRL on this side, and can Super League reach that level? And we'll get onto that in a minute. But the Women's World Cup, drawn in a group with Scotland, that's going to be interesting. A home nations derby. I think Phil Neville is underrated as a coach in the game. Yes, he hasn't had the best coaching career at men's senior level as an assistant. The teams he's coached for haven't been great when he's been an assistant. As a player, underrated as a player. I honestly believe that. He came along at a time when there were a lot of good right and left backs and those who can play defensive midfield roles. He came along at a time when, there were a lot of good defensively minded players in midfield and defence for England. Let's get back to your early question about the Super League and the NRL. So we'll put the Super League over here. And the NRL over here. The issues between the two is the NRL has the two ref system. And Super League has one ref. So automatically, when you look at two refs, one ref, you're going to have a better game because less foul play can be committed, less cheating can be committed. They're hot on the play the ball. They're hot on a variety of things. With the two ref system, there's more eyes on the field. One ref, that's a harder system. I think the two ref system actually helps the play. Then you got to look at where they're playing. Traditional, for the most part, north of England for the most part. So that's limiting the fan base. Australia does have the same problem. The NRL does have a similar issue. The East Coast and Sydney. Yes, there is a criticism that there are too many teams in Sydney and they're too East Coast centric and they should expand. North of England for the primary, but they have looked at Canada. The issue is there is no team in the Super League, really, apart from two clean. When we say that, there's only one team in London in the Super League, and there's only two professional teams in the south of England. So that is a big problem. This is a problem, but um, you know, they've been a bigger league before. They've looked at Perth, they've looked at Adelaide. They've done a variety of things. Um, you know, um, the issue with this is they're seen as still both leagues are seen as too safe. But when we look at players going over, more. Also, TV figures. Also, more free to air TV. So the TV figures for percentage of population higher in the Australian market. More people in nationwide watch that. Each state has a rugby league structure. Even Tasmania has a rugby league structure, Tasmanian Rugby League, so the TRL. Yeah, each state and territory has a rugby league kind of structure with a regional league that then feeds up with player development into the NRL. Sean, I will get back to the NHL going to a 40-team league. I just want to finish this off. The more top players go to the NRL than vice versa. Limited TV coverage. Limit. Oh God. We could say state of origin as well. We'll get that in there. I think state of origin helps. Hence why the NRL is better off. We could argue that Super League has, let's say, a higher possible skill level, physicality. They're bigger, pace the games quicker. They have the state of origins. There's that next tier between international and club level. Better TV coverage, more fans. Each state, each region of Australia has a regional rugby league federation. So Tasmania, Western Australia, Victoria, South Australia, Northern Territory, Canberra, the Capital Territory, Queensland, New South Wales. Each region of Australia, each state and territory has its own semi-pro rugby league structure where there is a league in place, and each state and territory has that. England, it's the North of England state schools. So that's my opinion on why the NRL is better than the Super League long term. There are things the Super League can do, but they don't. Will the NHL go to 40 teams? I think that'd be too big. I don't think it's doable. You can actually get an 82 game season or a 78 game season. You play each team twice, home and away. That's it. You could play each team twice and have a 76 or a 78 game league. It is doable, but I don't think fans would appreciate not seeing their own division and own conference enough, and having even less games than senior other conference. I think Quebec and Hartford have issues because Connecticut isn't as well off as people realise. The city of Hartford is in a real financial state. There's not a lot of money in Hartford, Connecticut, and Quebec. The Canadian dollar is, as a Canadian you should know, is not at parity with the US dollar, and there's a reason why there isn't a team in Quebec now. The reason why Winnipeg got a team back is because they had to find a place to put an Atlanta Thrashers franchise that was failing and had failed, and the owners of MTS Bell Centre were like, by the way, guys, we already have the Manitoba Moose here. We have an NHL ready arena that's on the small side, but it's there, and we have a hockey mad fan base that personally don't like Gary Bettman. And the league was like, okay. I can't see if you watch my views on the Arizona going to the Central Division, I can't see them being moved to Houston because of a variety of factors. And of course, the players will want a personal share in any expansion fee going into the collective bargaining agreement. And I don't think the owners will be happy with that. So I think the owners will be happy to keep it at 32. I think the league has shown itself to be against relocation as well. And until last year, was very much against expansion. Since 2000, no teams had ended until last year. So the league went on, I think, since 1967. The lack of expansion was a telling sign, and with the labour unrest and the possibility of a lockout in a couple of years, there are far bigger issues to concern the league with than expanding beyond what is actually a sustainable league, unless you want to have an East versus West league where the winners of each play off for like a Super Bowl style final. Um, I cannot see a 40-team league working. The fans won't buy into it. That will require a lot of travel. It's doable to have actually less games and have a 40-team league, but you'd only be able to play each team twice for that to have the same working out roughly as what we have now with games per season around the late 70s, early 80s. You could do it, but at the same time, would the players be happy with that? Would the fans be happy with that? Would the owners be happy with that? Because the rivalries are what makes the NHL. And um, Bettman, he's the mouthpiece for the owners. If Bettman is saying it's not going to happen, even though they haven't ruled it out, I think the owners are realizing that the next collective bargaining agreement, they're possibly going to have to give up some of their expansion fee wealth that they've acquired over every expansion. It gets distributed between the owners, except Vegas this time around don't get any of Seattle's money, but they are protected from the expansion draft. Basically, yes, the players want a bigger share of the money coming into the game and into the league, and the owners don't want to give up that share, so they're going to agree to it and then never expand ever again until the next collective bargaining agreement when they write it out and then they do it. Relocation fees are a lot less. The fact that Houston and Quebec do have arenas ready and Houston do have an owner ready is something, but if Arizona relocate to Houston, it doesn't really upset the divisions, but the league would rather have expansion fees. Relocation fees aren't enough to placate the owners and the players. It just doesn't work. It completely won't work. Doesn't work. There's bigger things to worry about than moving an Arizona team that the NHL has said is not leaving the state of Arizona. If they get their arena sorted and possibly go back to Phoenix or Tucson, there's no problem there. Plus, fans are buying back in to suddenly go right. We've got 3,500 more fans per game average this season over last season's, and the historic low of I think 12,000. They're up to nearly 17,000 now attending games. That's nearly a sellout. They're getting to the point where they're selling out that arena. If you were suddenly go, we're going to move this team, you suddenly have lost a massive fan base in the state of Arizona. And people forget that Austin Matthews is only a player of ice hockey because he watched the Arizona Coyotes play as a kid when they were called Phoenix. So for all these Canadian fans going, move Arizona, move Carolina, move Florida, there are kids playing the game now that wouldn't have played the game if it wasn't for those teams being where they are. And there's NHL players playing right now that would not be playing if it wasn't for teams like Dallas and Arizona and Florida and Carolina playing and winning Stanley Cups or getting to the playoffs and inspiring them to play. So it's a dangerous game you want to play if the NHL is obsessed with going these non-traditional markets and growing the game. To then go, we're admitting defeat doesn't look good as a PR standpoint from the NHL, and growing the game in the US, it doesn't look good. So they have to be very, very careful. Do I see London getting an NFL team? No. No. Other major leagues have come out and said, and they quite rightly, the travel distances, TV problems, getting the TV deals for the TV audience. We're already 5 hours ahead of the East Coast, 8 hours ahead of the West Coast. If that NFL team in London was playing a West Coast team, it would have to be played in the middle of the night, and the transport infrastructure just isn't there by Wembley. It's poor. It's shockingly poor, actually. Um, there's very limited night tubes and night buses in London. There are some routes that do run past Wembley, but they're not very frequent and they're not very well. They're not great, and it only benefits the London area. It doesn't benefit the rest of the country. Also, you got to look at property price costs and the tax laws. They're going to try and avoid paying, the players will try and avoid paying taxes, and the property prices in the UK on average are higher than the US. So you want to try, and the tax rates are higher as well. So to attract an NFL player to come and live and buy into that community, they're going to be paying a lot more in taxes than they would in the US, and that's going to put players off. The time zone difference, the TV zone difference, the travel that would be required. The Jacksonville Jaguars owner said he can't try to buy Wembley to make it easier, and that failed. So there is some pushback now. I wouldn't be surprised if the Super Bowl takes place at Wembley or Twickenham, but I don't see an NFL team moving to the UK. There's another reason: NFL Europe failed. There's a massive US expat community over here um, in Europe, but NFL Europe failed. So you could have a look at that. The NFL is starting slowly to flatten out with fan base. It's not growing any new fans. It's peaked and it's sort of stabilizing. The NFL has bigger issues within the game itself, with various issues within the game. Plus, when it comes to a collective bargaining agreement, which is very similar to the NHL, except the NFL players don't seem to go on strike as much. That would be on the table, and you'd have to have 2/3 of owners agree to place a team in London. And I don't think you're going to get that kind of agreement within the ownership group. It's the same with the NHL with relocation or expansion. You have to get 2/3 of owners to sign off and be happy with putting a team in a location. This is where North American sports are different, are hugely different to European sports. There's no promotion relegation. Um, Teams are franchised, so they don't necessarily have that connection with the city because they can be relocated to wherever the league wants. Ticket prices are generally very, very high. A lot of TV timeouts, a lot of TV breaks. Whether the British fan base would be happy with that and the TV fan base be happy with that's another thing. Who would get the coverage over here? There's a big talking point about current TV deals with sports and TV coverage and media coverage within a variety of sports in this country. Also, because it takes place in the autumn winter, that's going to clash with football, rugby union, ice hockey, sports that already are established in this country with fan bases, with TV deals, with professional leagues. They're going to have to try and compete against established leagues. So that's going to be an interesting point. Can they get enough of the market share in the UK market or the European market, because it could be anywhere in Europe, to compete and make money in that market? Yes, the NFL games in London do make the NFL money, but if they have a team there, would the team actually turn a profit with stadium rental, with property prices in London, taxes in the London area for high earners, the money you would have to pay in wages for the London allowance, because it's an expensive city to live in? Would you be able to attract players? And would it be able to get enough market share, considering that London as a city itself has many professional sports teams that have big rivalries in both rugby union, rugby league, and football, and to a certain extent ice hockey, to a very certain extent, very minor extent. You're going to have to compete with the other sports that have used London, have clubs in London that attract fans. You've got to try and nick fans from other sports to watch NFL. And I think there's a limit to the NFL fan base in the UK. And I think we've seen that limit peak and stay steady. I haven't seen any kind of survey done to say NFL is still growing in popularity over in this country. So for the long term, I mean, if the other major leagues have ruled out moving a team to the UK or to Europe, the NHL, the NBA, Major League Baseball is only taking in European Series games to the UK next year. They pulled out the year before, so there is, long term. The other major leagues have ruled out having teams in Europe. They've considered it in the past, but they've ruled out um, taking a team to Europe. Even though they play these European Series games or World Series games, and they do play games in Europe out of their regular season, um, they've all said one off, it's doable. Long term, no, no. Um, it wouldn't work for the North American TV market, which is their bread and butter. The North American fans, would they be willing to travel? Considering the prices of flights, hotels, food, drink, ticket itself, travel to and from hotel. It's it's an interesting question you asked, but at the same time, we've had this discussion in the NBA. We've had this discussion with the NHL as well, and they've ruled out now, at least for now, having teams over here. Um, the NFL one is more of a debate because they do play more games over in Europe than the others. But I would, um, that an ongoing question. But at the same time, if the NBA, a more profitable league, with the Boston Celtics chief executive officer saying this ain't happening, and they're a team that makes money and knows they have a fan base over in Europe where fans buy in and do buy Celtics gear or LA Lakers gear or Chicago Bulls. If he's saying, yeah, this ain't going to happen, and that's the most profitable league in the world, that says, yeah, it's not going to happen. My top 10 favorite games of all time. Wow. Does that mean in one particular sport or all sports? That would be an interesting list. Um, I would have to do it by each individual sport, and I'll probably do it with a top five, rather than um, a top 10 of all time, because that would cover a multitude of sports. I could do my top 10 favorite sporting moments. I think that would probably be more apt. Um, but that would be an interesting top 10 list to do. Absolutely. I'll be more than happy to have a look at doing that as a top 10 list. I think that'd be really interesting to look at what I would consider my top five or top 10 sporting moments. But I think it might be better to do top five of individual sports and leagues and then take the top of each one of them and then try and rank them. It would be really interesting, but I would definitely have to seriously consider, um, what um, what I'll consider. Is it a moment in a game? Is it an actual event like a World Cup final? Bearing in mind, I've watched every World Cup final since 1994, and I've watched every Euro since 1992. There's a lot of moments in there, which I could put in for the football playlist alone. Rugby's another one. The 1995 Rugby Union World Cup in South Africa, with Joost van der Westhuizen taking out Jonah Lomu. But that would definitely be one of my top 10. Um, but half the people who watch my channel weren't alive in 1995 to understand what those two late great, because both Jonah Lomu and Joost van der Westhuizen are no longer with us. They both died within the last few years. So, what that moment means for rugby union as a professional sport, and what that means for post-apartheid South Africa, and what it means for the Maori community and the South Sea Island community in New Zealand and Australia and the Pacific Islands. What does that mean? Both were legends in the sport. Jonah Lomu never actually got to lift the Rugby World Cup, and Joost van der Westhuizen did, but they both died young. They both died roughly at the same age, and both had controversy in their private lives to do with their women in their lives. Having been lucky enough to meet the great Jonah Lomu when I was a kid, because they used our school as a training facility when they were preparing for their test match against England at Twickenham in 1997. I was very honoured to actually meet Jonah Lomu, albeit briefly, 21 years ago. And would that be on my top 10 sporting list, being the All Blacks in 1997? Probably. And seeing them practice the haka was as a kid, I didn't quite understand what the haka was until I was a bit older. But now looking back on it, I was pretty privileged to see them practice the haka that they were going to uh, show that test match. And I watched that test match on TV. And yeah, Jane Lomi was probably one of the best players of all time. And that's when his kidneys were already failing. So yeah, I've been lucky, I would think, in some of the sporting moments that I've witnessed. Um, I My top 10 is going to be interesting. Um, I will say that I would say the Euro 2004 final when Cristiano Ronaldo's bawling his eyes out because the Greeks played a great team game and Portugal played as a team of individuals. It was brilliant seeing him cry. I felt so privileged to watch him bawl his eyes out. It made me feel happy about myself seeing that prima donna actually bawl his eyes out like an absolute child. But it just shows the commitment that they had for that day. The 2006 World Cup final, which went to penalties, because my cousins are half Italian. That was a bit of a religious moment when they lifted that trophy, and the whole family basically went on a jolly for a month. You could say Johnny Wilkinson's drop goal in the 2003 Rugby Union World Cup final. Um, the 2014 New South Wales Blues winning State of Origin for the first time in nearly a decade. I mean, there's a variety of sports that I could possibly put in and sporting moments. Um, so Bradley Wiggins winning the Tour de France and gold in the individual time trial at the Olympics in 2012. Absolutely. There is a whole host of moments that I've been watching since 1992 that I could definitely put down as my top 5 or top 10. And absolutely. It it's a difficult one, I would say. Uh, I think the CFL has issues. The XFL with under Vince McMahon and WWE's ownership, it failed once, it will fail again. It will just take longer to fail this time. The Arena Football League is a bit of a mess as well. But this is a whole argument with the Arena Football League, the CFL, the XFL League, Take Two. The American Canadian football style and the variants of North American football, as we'll call it, are there. I don't know if there's the money or the willingness in the Canadian sports world to either. I think what they got to do is definitely expand the CFL and move the season to the summer when you don't have all the crappy weather, which basically stops you playing matches because it gets too cold. So I think moving the CFL to a summer league would help that, and expanding it from 7 teams would really help. But at the same time, um, there isn't the money in the CFL. There just isn't. Um, and I don't know if there's the willingness in the Canadian sports world to do it. I just don't know if there's the willingness or the finances to do it with the Canadian dollar as it is what it is. I think that'd be a big risk. And then you've got to try and work out that the MLS is expanding year on year, and they have Canadian teams. There's question marks about some of the NHL franchises in Canada right now, such as Ottawa and Calgary, and their rink issues. So there are issues already in Canadian sport that need addressing before you start expanding or fiddling with league structures or looking at expanding teams or starting up a new league or anything like that. I think Canadian sport as a whole needs to look at what's going on right now rather than, oh, let's cure the issue by just putting a new team in place. It's more complicated than that. I think the issues within Canadian sport are deep rooted. It's partly to do with the links with Canadian and North and US sport between the various leagues, such as the MLS, the NBA, and the NHL, and how if you have that cross nationality kind of that cross border league, the NHL and the MLS being prime examples of multiple teams being in Canada and then obviously the main teams being in the US. there are issues. Obviously, the wages are paid in US dollars over Canadian dollars. The discrepancy and the disparity between the Canadian dollar and the US dollar as well, with the weakness of the currency. Economic issues right now in certain parts of Canada, and Justin Babyface Trudeau being Prime Minister, and Trump being President. There's political issues as well, on a variety of issues. There are issues within Canadian sport right now that need to be resolved before you can look at growing the sport again. You need to get the house in order, and the CFL moving to a purely summer league would definitely help with the CFL, because the CFL right now has got to compete with the NHL and is going to lose every time. Do I see PSG bring back a rugby league team? It didn't work the first time. They've never had a rugby union team, even though there are teams around the Paris and that part of northeastern France in rugby union. Rugby league and rugby union in France is interesting to look at. The reason why PSG had a team was obviously they had the Super League NRL wars in Australia, and the English Super League wanted to compete and were actually the better league, and they went down a similar path with looking at the French system and merging French clubs into the Super League system, which they have done very effectively, with Perpignan, which became Catalan, or the two Perpignan clubs became Catalan Dragons, and Toulouse, who've been very, very successful as well to a point as being the second best French team. The PSG team had a variety of reasons why it failed. Rugby league in France went through some very dark days in the modern era. It's rugby. Both kinds of rugby is predominantly played in the south of France, not the north. So there's an issue there with is there a fan base? Is there a demographic to watch and support? And PSG also had money problems after that as well, as a sporting club. And this is a European culture where you have a sporting club which will cover multiple sports, including squash, swimming, gymnastics, football, rugby, whatever. It didn't work for a variety of reasons. Fan base wasn't there. The players they recruited were second rate. Rugby league in France was in a dark patch anyway. At quality level, it just wasn't there. The professionalism wasn't there. The wages weren't high enough. The playing quality wasn't there. If they were to do it now, yes, it is plausible that it would work, but there has to be a willingness from rugby league in France to support it. There has to be a willingness on a variety of factors. But as we're seeing in France right now, sport in Paris and around the major cities is actually on lockdown with the unrest. There's a variety of factors that would go against bringing PSG rugby league back. PSG as a club, as a sporting entity, and as a business is under the spotlight for breach of financial fair play and corruption allegations and a variety of other issues. So that they have to resolve those issues. There's question marks about where the money's come from. There's a whole host of questions about PSG's ownership and rule breaches and corruption and tax avoidance and a whole variety of other issues that would put any rugby league team on a back burner. There's been no kind of hint or inkling that the Super League would consider expanding into Paris again. It's been there before and it's failed before, so I think it's gone with its tail between its legs and backed away. The London Broncos hasn't been so much of a failure. The London Broncos existed before the Super League was thought of, but the Super League, were encouraging to get a team in the London area to make it more of a national competition. And apart from the odd season out, they've pretty much been a Super League team since the Super League's inception in 1995. They've had the odd season where they weren't in, but for the most part, they have been a Super League team. But they've never really had a permanent home. They played at the Stoop at Harlequins, had a partnership with Harlequins for a couple of seasons. They played at Ealing. They played in Barnet. So they do need to have a permanent London Broncos home stadium somewhere in the London area where they can call home permanently forevermore and not have to move around the greater London area, because that will affect fan base and that will affect revenues and a whole host of things. But London, as I said before, is a very expensive city to live and work in. So to attract players, they're going to have to give, if there is another look at salary cap and Super League, they're going to have to allow the cap to be slightly higher in London to be able to attract players of equal standing that they would otherwise attract to other clubs. There has to be some kind of cap balance to make it fair for the London team to compete. And Paris is exactly the same. Paris is an expensive city to live in. So would players be willing to pay a higher tax rate on their regional taxes, so that council tax, and locate in a city that's very expensive to live in, with the wages they get? Um, so there is that as well. But there are big social issues in France right now. I think a rugby league team in Paris is the least of the concerns, but there's been no kind of direction or inkling from the Super League and both the English and French rugby league federations to have a professional team in Paris, PSG, or even Racing Metro or Stade Francais, any of the professional rugby union teams. There's not a single inkling that they're going to have a dual codes club. So we'll have to see on that. I can't promise any. I can't say that they're going to consider it. There was obviously someone with a contingency plan going, possibly we should. But if you look at the political and economic stuff that's going on right now with Brexit and the economics and politics behind it, that again would say possibly not at this time. That went well. I'll just drop your fucking bag on the floor. But no, we have been there before. It didn't work out before. There's a whole host of reasons why it failed back in the 90s. And some of those structural issues within the sport are still there. So there's a whole host of things to consider. Sale Sharks. Bristol are doing a lot better than people realise. Newcastle and Worcester are staying out the bottom as well. But we're halfway through the season. A lot could happen. There's a whole London Irish getting relegated. People weren't expecting that. So that's happened. So no team is too big to go down. But the honest answer is I don't know. We're only halfway through the season. There is still time for them to turn it around. The international season is now over, so they got all their overseas players back. It'll be interesting to see how they do perform and how they do get out of the trouble they're in. But there are other teams as well that are underperforming, like Northampton Saints and Leicester Tigers. That have declined over recent years. So it's not they're completely dead and buried. There are teams around them that are also struggling this year that could also get sucked in. So I wouldn't say they will, but they could. But again, there's still time for them to resolve the situation and get out of the trouble they're in. And no team is too big to go down. We've seen Northampton Saints get relegated. We've seen London Irish get relegated in the past. We've seen Bristol go down in the past when they were actually a good side. So no team is too big to go down. I've always been told that no team is too big to fail, and you shouldn't just because of your history be guaranteed a spot in a league. You have to be able to perform in said league, and be competitive in a league to earn the right to stay in it. But this is another difference between the European system and the North American system, where there is no promotion relegation. The ironic thing is the Toronto Wolfpack in Canada play in the Super League structure, and there is a promotion relegation system in that structure. But this is the difference between the North American style of sport and the European style of sport, and the huge differences. In North America, when a team really sucks, they tend to relocate. In Europe, when a team sucks, they get relegated and have to then improve to get back up to the level they were at before. Both systems have their merits. Both systems have their flaws. I think we are more community orientated than the North American sports, but we are seeing a shift in the North American sports where teams are staying in a location for a lengthy period of time, sometimes permanently, and not move and build a community and be part of the community. But it's just the culture. It's just the sporting culture. It's just how things work over here. We're governed by associations and governing bodies. We are privately owned clubs. Over in North America, it's franchised, where the league is where the money is. So it's a different sporting culture. It's a different way that the sport is organised and structured. Salary caps are more commonplace in North America than over here. We don't really have one. Luxury taxes as well is another way. If they don't have a salary cap, again, we don't really have that. You can get paid as much as you want as a professional football player. Rugby, there is some kind of salary constraints in both codes, but again, you can get paid to a certain level and be worth a certain amount of money. So it's a difficult one to look at and say, the system is perfect. No system is perfect. See, we haven't had to deal with seasons where players have been locked out and lengthy player strikes. The North American sports, they have that more often. I'm not saying it's players haven't threatened to strike or there isn't player unrest over here in European sports, but it's the difference in the sporting cultures. They're very marked. This is why I don't think the NFL comes to London. Um, you know, the sporting culture is significantly different. Um, and because teams over here, the clubs over here, are actually founded by members of the community. Back in the day, they actually were founded by community members who were wealthy men in the community. Said, right, we're going to set up a football team, or a rugby team, or a cricket team, and I'm going to be the benefactor. It's completely different sporting cultures. More community orientated over here, where the clubs are actually part of the community structure going back 100 plus years. But it's an interesting question. It's an interesting debating point, and I've debated that before: the European sports culture versus the North American sports culture and the differences, and they are massively marked differences. Um, it's club over franchise, and it is and our sporting structures are an alien concept to North Americans, and vice versa. When North Americans watch the Premier League, they a lot of them don't realise that there's a relegation at the end of the season, and 3 teams disappear and 3 new teams come up. It's the same in European hockey as well. Ice hockey, there are some leagues that have promotion relegation, and it's what the playoff structures do it. But it is what it is. It's different cultures of sport, but the same result is the same. The best team generally wins the title, and the worst teams generally don't. But I'm going to leave that there. It's been very interesting, Sean. I'm going to have to look at your Twitter feed and see what this Muppet has done whilst playing Fortnite. Kane, some good questions. Mr. Hanson, some good questions as well. Everyone else who was involved, really appreciate all your questions and the debating points we've had. Didn't use the whiteboard as much as I wanted to in this live stream, but there were some topics we just didn't discuss. And the other topics we discussed didn't really need the whiteboard. I was planning to have more notes on it, but it is what it is. But no, thank you very much, everyone, for watching and getting involved. I really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much. Obviously, I've got some new video content up on the channel as well, so feel free to check out all the videos I've done the last couple of days and weeks since the last live stream. There's been some really interesting stuff happening. It's been a slow sporting news day today, which is what it is. But we'll deal with that. But there we go. Thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe. Place your comments below, and whatever. I really appreciate all you guys. Generally getting involved. Really appreciate it, and I'll have some more live streams for you soon. So ta-ta.